Merhabalar, hoş geldiniz. Ben Fulya Erdemci, 13. İstanbul Bienali'nin küratörü. İstanbul Bienali'nin Kamusal Programı'nın ilk etkinliğinin, Şehri Kamusallaştırmak isimli ilk etkinliğinin ikinci gününe hoş geldiniz. Aslında ben bu etkinliğin başlangıcını Bienal'in başlangıcı olarak görüyorum. Çünkü kamusal programda bilgi üretimi, yani teorik alan, pratik alan ve sanatsal alanı bir araya getirmek istedik. Ve zaten bu bir arada bulunan, yapay olarak ayrılmış alanların birlikte tecrübe edilmesini istedik. Dün akşam aramızda olanlar için bir tekrar olacak ama olmayanlar için çok kısaca şunu söylemek istiyorum. Bienal'in kuramsal ekseni kamu kavramı ve kamusal alan kavramı. Birçoğunuz takip ediyorsunuzdur. 90'lardan beri süregelen bir tartışma bu. Ve biz bu kavramları donmuş akademik anlamlarıyla değil ama dönüşen, değişen ve potansiyel anlamlarıyla değerlendirmeye çalıştık. Kamusal program Bienal'in entegre bir parçası, daha önce söylediğim gibi, ve 5 etkinlik kümesiyle kamu kavramını ve kamusal alan kavramını açımlamaya çalışacağız. Kamusal program için daha önce Amsterdam'da Skor Vakfı'nda çalışırken de işbirliği yaptığım Andrea Philips'i eş küratörüm olarak davet ettim. Şimdi sözü kendisine vereceğim. Çok kısaca size kamusal program hakkında bilgi verecek ve bugünkü ilk konuşmacımızı tanıtacak. Çok teşekkürler. Sözü Andrea'ya veriyorum.
Thank you. Thank you, Fulya. So yes, again, many of you who were here last night will have heard this, as Fulya says before, but just very briefly to open up the question of the public programme before I introduce the first speaker, and to follow on from what Fulya has just said, we've called the public programme Public Alchemy. And for those of you who are interested in histories of medicine and magic and science, you'll understand that alchemy is the idea of transforming a base metal, something very common and ordinary, into something precious and valuable. And what we're going to do across all of the platforms of the public programme, leading up to and through the exhibition, which starts in September, that Fulya is curating, we're going to be trying to think of ways in which we can do that. Ways in which we can transform the concept of the public, as Fulya has said, thought of academically and thought of also politically as a very homogenized, static whole, a group of people onto which things are placed, to which things happen, into a body of active, singularized citizens with their own ideas and own imaginations about the way in which cities should be transformed, and perhaps the ways in which cities should not be transformed, which of course is the founding principle, or the first idea that we're opening up the Biennale with this weekend, with our idea of making the city public. One of the chief proponents of this, and somebody that has inspired us a great deal in thinking through these ideas, is the artist Christoph Schaefer, who is going to be talking with us today. Christoph is an artist. He's also somebody who's been very, very involved in thinking through the concept of the right to the city. The right to the city is a concept that you might know comes from the theoretician Henri Lefebvre, and is going to be kind of featuring in Christoph's talk today. The Right to the City movement in Hamburg, which was a reanimated movement that's been happening for a couple of decades that Christoph's been very, very involved in. Christoph also was one of the founding members of a collective of people who got together and made a project called Park Fiction that started in 1994 in Hamburg, a project in which the group transformed a space in the city near the harbour through a parallel process of fictional and playful planning, which Christoph also might talk about a little bit today. So very related to many of the things also we hope to be talking about in the panel discussion later on. And finally, Christoph's most recent project has been to work again collaboratively with a group of people on a university in the south of Germany where he's developed a container university, so a temporary transformative new educational model which uses collaboration and collectivity to rethink the ways in which education is delivered. I think that's probably a summary. Okay, Christoph, the floor is yours. Thank you very much and welcome to the public program.
Yeah, I'm the first time in my life in Istanbul and in Turkey since now 12 hours, and I feel a bit intimidated by the scale and also the beauty and wow, the city is just like, my God. So what can I say to you? But I loved the introduction and the mentioning of Alchemy, and I like this book by Najib Mahfouz, where I don't know if everybody has read it, where you have like the story of Moses, the story of Jesus, the story of Muhammad, and then the final chapter is about a mysterious figure who is an alchemist. And I never understood what he was supposed to represent. And this alchemist is kind of, he's not like a light figure like those religious figures, but he's kind of, I never understood it. Of course, in the Middle Ages, alchemists were trying to make gold, as far as I'm concerned, and as artists, we also have this idea that we can transform shit to gold. And maybe these little experiences from... I will talk about Lefebvre a bit and a bit about our little Hamburg experiences, and maybe it resonates with something here. Yeah, I hope so. So... yeah, the talk is called A Machine of Possibilities, and I thought that's a good name because I didn't want to so bluntly advertise my book, which I will now advertise again. It's called The City is Our Factory. But actually, this sentence, the city is a machine of possibilities, is from Henri Lefebvre. And he never talked about the city as a factory, because factory for him was a place of oppression. And the factory, of course, I wanted to have that sound of oppression in the title of my book, as well as the machine of possibilities. I tried to kind of be a bit opportunistic and painted this painting, which is not in the book, or drawing, which is supposed to represent Cappadocia. But yeah, the subtitle is The Urban Turn, Art, Subjectivity and the Right to the City. And the right to the city is also a term coined by Henri Lefebvre, an essay he wrote in '67. And as I learned yesterday, the audience is somehow over-informed, but there's always people who probably didn't read through the French issues of Lefebvre. So Lefebvre is a thinker who wrote 4 books on cities and space between roughly 67 and 75. And there was a point in time when no one read Lefebvre, and with the publishers of Spectre Books, we got the idea in 2008 that we wanted to make a book called Lefebvre for Kids, and that's what I will do with you tonight, this afternoon. Go through the history of the city, starting 660,000 years before Christ, when Lefebvre sees in this. I go through the key terms on what describes a city at the beginning. So Lefebvre actually explicitly mentions that the process of urbanization or the urban revolution begins at the moment when human beings walk through the nature and collect stuff and put it on little piles. So, and he calls this like the accumulation of differences. And of course, a city is accumulated difference. I think probably everybody would agree on that, that a city consists of differences and of density, accumulation. As Teddy said yesterday, and so nicely and explained. Okay, these little heaps of differences, one would think that's a very banal question, but or thing to say. But if you consider how utopian thinking was working in the, let's say, last 600 years, then there was always an idea of homogeneity connected to the idea of utopian states or utopian ideas. And that Lefebvre, as a Marxist thinker, says, no, the idea is the city, and at the heart of the city is the concept of condensed differences, gives you a very different idea of a utopia. Before that, as I said, there was like nature, things were just lying around and kind of developed organically. But then at some point, maybe 5,000 years ago, and in Turkey already 4,000 years before that, this city was invented at the river's bend. And here's for you to write down, the city is condensed difference. Those heaps become bigger, and actually people start to live in these heaps like they do since a long time in Cappadocia. And the city of is founded. And this is how the people looked in that city. And they are very, yeah, you see it, they are very different types of people. And even in Cappadocia, this development resonated. Also there, people became more and more different, invented weird cooking tools like this. And yeah, this is from Assur, and yeah, I mean, you know it much better than I do, which influence the Assur trade network had on Anatolia, for instance. However, when Assur was founded and already was like a city, like a big city, in the temple of Ishtar, the goddess Ishtar, they found these, they had these like little altars, and they were in the shape of houses. And I saw these in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin, and they are made from clay. And I thought, hey, why do they put like these little altars into a temple? And so my speculation was that at the time people were really like knew what an awesome invention the city is, so they put these things into the temple. However, Assur became this like big state and an empire, and then the art changed. These houses are only found in the very oldest layer of the Ishtar temple, and in the higher layers you have these things called lamassu, which are these like stone, granite, giant and intimidating sculptures. And I somehow thought the landing of the emperor interrupts the city's currents. Yeah, that's, yeah. So the bottom line of this is that the city and the state are not identical, but basically two completely different concepts, although they appear probably roughly at the same time in history. Another example for the state way of thinking is this Roman bridge, like the army state logic is kind of applied to traffic. A very rational structure like this one that was, they built the same in Germany, they built probably the same here. And I always liked these models of London because 1,600 years later the same bridge looks like this. the city has, taken over the bridge. This is London Bridge in 1616, and somehow it displays the differences to itself and to the visitors and to the people who live in the city. And actually, the London Bridge had like the rights of its own, an own borough, so it was a self-organized body. And in the center, like here, was a very nice building with a very nice name. It was called the Nonsuch House. And the Nonsuch House was not just a house, but it was even imported from Holland. So it was crafted by foreigners and then came to the city and was displayed there. So people, I think, were conscious, city dwellers were conscious of this idea of difference. Yeah, the Romans again. And another Roman city that is originated from the legions camps, which was like the model of founding cities by the Romans, and then the city would be planned out. So these types of cities, because I think in the West we always get told how the Romans brought us the civilization, but in fact they also brought this city model, which is a very controlled model of city, which is a very controlled model of what is public space and what is private space and where has everything to be. And I think it distorts the vision of what a city is. Oops. Because the next thesis is the city is not the state. I skip this one because we don't have endless time. This amazing drawing is taken from Lefebvre's book, The Urban Revolution, where he draws a vector from 0 to 100% urbanization. That's like the line we are on. We are now at this point. We didn't quite reach 100%, but yeah, we are in the process of urbanization. I made a couple of drawings to explain the advantages of density. If you have a blanket like that and point A and B are far away from each other, you fold it and then it comes closer. You fold it again and they're very close by. And as you can see, if density multiplies the possibilities of a space, as Engels said in his wonderful essay on London, how the city multiplies the abilities of the individual, and it makes intelligent. And if you unfold the brain, the surface of the brain has the size of France. And yeah, I go over to the next step. It's concerning appropriation. Appropriated space. This is the stadium of Arles in the Middle Ages, and maybe a very comparable situation to the Hippodrome here. But I don't know how it looked like, but in Arles in the Middle Ages it looked like that. And usually if you go into these like architecture books or history of the city books, then you would find these pitiful remarks about like those poor people, those dumb twits in the Middle Ages. They got this nice structure that the Romans built and then they fucked it up and messed around with it and like added things and created these spaces and appropriated and lived in it and used it as a fortress even. And I always liked this way of treating these old monuments. Because a multitude of spaces is being created, the spaces are appropriated, and if you think about what this arena was, in the Roman time it was something where like people are fixed in the position of audience and then they watch the spectacle in the middle. So I think it's, yeah, so it was a very different approach. And also the buildings in Rome looked like that till maybe 1910, 1920, and then fascism came and erased all this. You know, they needed those sublime ruins, the clean history, And this idea clearly marks fascism as an anti-urban ideology, I would say. Yeah, and also, of course, I have to think about a lot about how today stadiums are used to, if gentrification projects are started and if a restructuring of cities and upgrading, upmarketing processes are started, it's big sports events are like the key events to do this. Like London has had its share of it last year, and it actually happens all over the place. And I think it's weird, or it's an interesting correlation between between these sports architectures and anti-urban restructuring. However, sometimes it happens that the audience leaves their seats and leaves their position as audience, as happened in Constantinople in 532, I think, when the you all know the story much better than I do, but as you know, back then they had these fan groups in Constantinople, the Blues and the Greens, who were supporting these racing teams. And at some point, these fans didn't fight each other anymore, but started to fight the king or the Caesar, the Justinian, and started this giant riot and nearly succeeded. But of course, if you start a rebellion and do it half-heartedly, you might be divided, and later, okay, you all know the story that 30,000 people were killed in Constantinople in the aftermath of the 2 weeks riots that followed the Nika riots. Everybody knows this story? Well, it's common knowledge. You learn it at school, right? So, okay, the audience leaves its seats. Now I jump again forward in time to Renaissance, because, okay, public is the issue here, but, well, if I think public, the term public, it was introduced, let's say, to the Northern European countries with the introduction of Roman law in the time of between 1300 and 1500, and it went hand in hand with the establishing of private property and with taking away the commons, which is a different concept than public, of course. And one of the things that kind of goes hand in hand with it is also this, like, establishing the border or the division between public and private, which is like, for instance, marked in the building of the first private park, which a pope built, of all persons. So up to the point, let's say, up to 1400 parks were in Christian Europe were not allowed in any private location, but only in the connection to churches. The first private park was built by a pope. It's the Belvedere in Rome. And it establishes not only the division between private and public realm, but also between body and mind, because these parks were devoted, like the highest stage or parterre or terrace was devoted to the spirit, the mind, the lowest to the body, and this level to the mediation between the two. So this kind of a whole setup of what is connected to public and what is ascribed to privacy was established in the course of time. And I made a second drawing for this because, of course, since then, in the good old bourgeois separation of public and private, happiness, passion, love, subjectivity, art and imagination were like on this side, private, and public was like army, traffic, politics, justice, and that's it, like necessities maybe. And it's a bit simple. I'm a bit oversimplistic, sorry. But yeah, is there another one? No. Okay, that as a background, because I think this this separation very much shapes our idea of politics and our idea of left and right and so on, of emancipation. But it's, of course, we live now in a time when this concept doesn't work in the same way as it used to. Quickly more, yeah, you know, Paris in the first half of the 19th century, an awesome, intimidating big city, which also had a lot of pride because people made the revolution. So it was basically a very important place, but also an uncontrollable place where, and Benjamin wrote in the Arcades project that in the 1830s, on average, there would have been like 6,000 barricades be built in Paris, so people could just shield off parts of town if they wanted to change something. And of course, you know what happened. Baron Haussmann built these boulevards that Paris is famous for now, tore down, like demolished 70% of the city. And so that's exactly, I mean, something that is happening now in places like Istanbul. I think it's quite happening right now. The French coined a very nice phrase for this. They called it, this process by Baron Haussmann, they called it embellissement stratégique, which means strategic beautification. And that was, you know, you get a fantastic boulevard, but the whole, your home or your neighborhood is gone. Of course, these were also had military reasons because the military, so the state could like intervene into the city much easier, and also these streets were opened in big events. So it was architecture as event, a thing that we see a lot in the last 20 years. Architecture, big signs, rad stuff is being built, and hey, everybody comes together, and miraculously, this is supposed to kind of fuel economy and make us all rich and happy. So this kind of embellishment strategy is implied right now a lot. Well, I leave that out. Yeah, but maybe not this one. This is another Roman bridge which Caesar built in Germany, and that bridge had only a strategic reason. You know, the Romans were like this size, and the Germanic people were like this size, so the Roman army was a bit scared because they could just, you know, come from like that. And so they thought, okay, we do a bit of psychological warfare, and they built this bridge, had 2 legions march on the other side of the Rhine, made sure that the scouts and spies of the Germans saw this. They were, of course, intimidated. Then the legions went back and destroyed the bridge. So it's kind of bridge building as psychological warfare. The same is happening in towns all over the place. I know it from New Delhi, where motorways and flyovers are like for the middle classes basically, and middle class in Delhi means like maybe 10% of the population or 15%. The car owning class has this warfare going on with the people who build their irregular houses. And somehow I felt I had to introduce at this point another new drawing, which who realizes where this is. You don't see your city anymore. It's a, yeah, it's, maybe you can't recognize it because I took it from like one of these computer simulations, and maybe there's something wrong with architects' perspectives also when they planned Taksim Square to be this like empty space and to have this traffic going through there. But I think we will have specialists on that theme later on, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity to introduce it at this point and maybe put something utopian in between. The next term I want to speak about is that the city and the inhabited space is the appropriated space. That again is purist Lefebvre. although I was taken off into other directions for now. And Lefebvre takes a sentence by the German poet Hölderlin. He takes it completely out of the context. The sentence is, poetically man dwells. And then he writes about how the urban revolution leads to something that is like poetic life. And Lefebvre's idea, in contrast to, let's say, maybe Hölderlin's idea, was informed, of course, by the way that the French bohème, was living. Thank you. So for Lefebvre, this means that it's impossible to dwell without a relationship to the imagination, without transcending the pure utility or the pure instrumentality of dwelling. So all this and this going over the top of the instrumentalized living is represented by posters, by religion, by religious objects, by stuff that relates to a past, all these things that you have in your flat. And for Lefebvre, he had this like slightly maybe too optimistic idea that was quite popular in the 60s, that work would be abolished in the next years and we wouldn't have to work anymore. And I think this promise is somehow still lingering at the horizon, although I don't know anybody who can't, everybody I know has to work. But he had this idea that we would reinvent ourselves as these poets. And of course, a poet, let's say in France, the cool artists were like the artists that people find cool today is Rimbaud and not some sculpture. So the people who didn't work with material. And actually a good poet would be someone who transforms his life or her life into poetry. And a good poet, you just need a cafe and someone who gives you a little note and a slip of paper. You just don't need any productive tools. So, and that's where you start. So the whole idea of refusing to work is connected to the idea of living as a poet. I think this somehow, when skateboarding became big, and Teddy yesterday thankfully showed a fantastic example of appropriation of space through skateboarders. So when skateboarding kind of started to become more radical in the early 80s, it was an activity that would transform cities by, in a very poetical way, by using stuff that has been placed for instrumental reasons in town to do something playful, joyful with them. So, and I also like the skateboard as an image of how art could work, because it's a platform. It allows you to use the world in a different way or see it in a different way. At the same time, you have to do it yourself. And skateboarding never starts from a pure position, but always from a wasted position. You can't think skateboarding without thinking concrete, fucked up cities, you know, perfect. It doesn't have this like back to nature idea or the back to purity idea in the background. And I think that's a very important shift in how you have to look at emancipatory politics and not refer to some natural state or some fantastic utopian perfect place, but you always start with somehow corrupted space. Yeah, the city goes through you. This one is called. This one is something I wouldn't show to my psychoanalyst. Yeah, for some reason. I never show this one when I do talks, but today I will, because, you know, science and stuff, I mean, I I like brain science to some degree because the brain scientists they found that like the development of the brain in the last 200,000 years was not concerned with developing individual abilities of individuals, of humans, but it was very focused on the development of the ability to form relationships and to, how do you call it, vernetzen, to wire up, to network, basically. The networking ability is what influenced the development of the brain much more than anything else. So in contrast to gene technology, which kind of went really well with neoliberal, egotistic, evolutionary ideas, this brain research leads to very different conclusions, which actually give you an idea again of maybe humans are collective beings. So, yeah. Oh, that is such a blunt illustration of that thought. Yeah, this one is also hard to translate, but there's this part where Lefebvre makes a differentiation between the idiosyncratic and the different. So the difference is something that is happening in cities, but the idiosyncratic, the identitary, the going back to your roots, your nation, and so on stuff is something that, according to Lefebvre, is like finished and over with the establishing of the French Revolution and with the establishment of capitalism, because capitalism transforms everything into a commodity and cuts the relation between the ground and the person irreversibly. And the thing that kind of replaces it is the difference of the city. And of course, you all, if you're like into these urban discourse, know Georg Simmel's X-Course on the Foreigner, where he very beautifully describes how the foreigner is what makes a city, and the foreign is the thing that has to be present in a city to make it a city. Yeah. All right. This is not Lefebvre, it's called Why Do People Like to Take Walks in Complicated Urban Layouts? We dreamt up metropolises. Another one for the psychoanalyst. And now we slowly come to our present time. According to Lefebvre, again, the imaginary is part of urban space, and the imaginary actually produces space. So a space is not produced by architecture as such, but by imaginations you have about space, by narratives. Last night's poem was something that produces an idea of this space, and it can produce realities, actually always, I think. And so that somehow shifts a lot of power suddenly to something which you think is not very powerful, art, maybe a drawing, maybe poetry, a talk on the street, thing that happened. And yeah, for Lefebvre, the imaginary and as well as art was also a kind of anti-position to the, a utopian anti-position to the instrumentalization of the city and the factory. And now we come into much more complicated times because now capitalism understands this mechanism, and it works like this. Appropriation of space, like opening up a nice neighborhood, let's say self-organized space, maybe followed by some nice coffee place and by these people who carry these cups of coffee with them, and kind of inventing new functions, making a place come alive, making inventions, leads to the production of value. it adds a value to areas. Actually, Teddy spoke about that last night. You spoke about the value added. Yeah, so that was much more precise than what I said. And the problem starts here with where the whole thing gets connected to the creative class discourse by Mr. Florida and the gentrification processes. But I think this is actually unavoidable. And with value, I mean added value, like a place that works as a platform is more valuable than a place where people just, you know, live next to each other and don't talk with each other and don't exchange. So this creates a field of conflict between participation, participation is here, appropriation and the production of desires. And because, for instance, I don't know what it's like here, but in Hamburg you have a lot of fucked up participation projects where people are asked, what do you want? Then an architect comes and then throws that in the waste paper basket. And Teddy yesterday described the moment when you have this photo of participation, people sit around a table and you have the community come together. And I was so thankful that you made this remark, because I hate these art projects where you have these photos that are supposed to prove the social interaction that happened and without any consequence at all. And that is, like, I think, a big problem. And appropriation is what happens anyway, and sometimes in a very drastic way, like here in Istanbul, where like probably half or 2/3 of the cities are basically like self-built and taken by people at some point. And production of desires is also, again, a different thing I might talk a bit more about later. Now we come into the time now where politics and capital have understood that passions make cities. If you had told to a German mayor in 1995 that passion is important for the future of a city, they would have said, oh, you're like, okay, dream on, dream on. Now that Richard Florida has written his book, Rise of the Creative Class, they understood that, oh yeah, maybe it's important to have like this cool neighborhood with these latte bars, and maybe we need some artists, and maybe we need like a great signature building that kind of looks good in magazines. And yeah, but I think the issue is much, much bigger. And the sentence, we built this city on rock and roll, has never been more true than today. But of course, subcultures have their own story of this, because they actually do create something new in cities. And it's, I think, this platform character and the fact that actually production returns to the city, even if it is an immaterial production, that is actually, yeah, just as I described it. So there's something to it. It's not just propaganda, it's also a real change in economy, and it changes the model of what classically was regarded as superstructure and basis in the Marxist terminology. Now I get a bit more personal. This is a series of drawings I made in 2001, and it was an exhibition in Wolfsburg. And Wolfsburg is this town where Volkswagen is produced, and it's completely dominated by Volkswagen. The exhibition was called The Third Sector, which is a slightly old-fashioned name for people who work in administration, art, or something like that. So I wondered, what do I have to do with this, and what should I do in a situation when it has become increasingly important for a car producer to produce an image, because basically everyone produces the same car at the same price these days, but let's say BMW Mini, that is like smaller and not quite as good as a classical Golf, nevertheless sells for the double price. So image is the key factor to sell this stuff. That, again, has a lot to do with what artists do. So I wanted to go into this myself, biographically, and it's called How I Became a Neoliberal Cultural Enterprise Show-Off Subject. You see me here in geography class. The teacher had told us that Essen, my hometown, is not the biggest industrial town anymore. Most people work in the third sector. And I went home and advised my father to sell his ThyssenKrupp shares, which he didn't do. We lost money. My 10 shares. Okay, to become an artist would be a good excuse to never work. We would be the avant-garde of non-work, and we wore mechanics jackets in the Oranian bar in Berlin, and we wore the shoes and old suits of our fathers. Artworks and explaining themselves don't work, they say. In summer 2001, a couple of friends of mine, we met in the Café des Artistes, and we had a little talk. Some of us managed to connect their subcultural and artistic practice with the fights against gentrification. Different from Berlin in the 90s, it was necessary in Hamburg to, get your teeth into it, to fight for every square meters of free space, instead of just, moving to the next quarter, which was very possible in Berlin in the 90s. But cities like Copenhagen or Hamburg were already so expensive that this was not an option. Especially our most radical gestures were best to be used for upmarketing real estate and to construct identities of new areas. If somewhere an illegal club opened his doors, next door there would be a cappuccino bar the next day, and that would be followed by a new media agency. We had become, oh God, I need the word now, Unternehmensberater. We had become entrepreneurial, blah, blah, blah, blah. Management consultants with hate masks. 5 minutes. Oh, that was fast. And I didn't get to Hamburg yet. Oh my God. Are you bored? Okay, I go through this quickly. Yeah. Okay, let's spare the intellectual stuff. So private is eating public right now. The latte zones are established around the world. And that has to do with the fact that cities are now our place of production. So we need the working canteen, the workers' canteen that was in the factory. Now the whole city has become our workers' canteen. We sit in cafes, and this type tells a joke to this one. He listens to it, types it into his smart pad, and whoop, the new advertising campaign is finished. But I think the cafe, in a certain way, is the paradigm of the new type of city, because it's a place of exchange, it's somehow individual, and this platform character is highly important. And even when you see this as a kind of maybe cynical or romantic image, the last project that Teddy showed last night had exactly this platform character on a community basis where you produce together. Cafes usually produce very immaterially, but I think you have to introduce this cafe exchange character into production, and then you can create something new. And that's okay. I'm jumping too fast. This image wants to symbolize the question how you can't differentiate between private emails, political emails, and economic emails anymore. We come to the time now, black holes in the neoliberal city development, a significant moment when the urban archive of Cologne was swallowed by a privatized underground construction company. That was in March 2009. The whole archive of the city was like swallowed. I don't know if what's an issue here. Great symbolic thing. Then part of the neoliberal urban development and restructuring of cities is that actually the memories of cities are being erased because all this knowledge that urban planners used to have about traditions of building and so on are erased because people get replaced by these management consultant types. And So, the last chapter deals with Hamburg. It's called Surrounding the... Hamburg is like one of the most straightforward, has a very neoliberal agenda, very rigid Florida, very competitive, and it goes under the label Maritime Talent City. Hamburg Marketing Limited is like an organization of the city. Brand Hamburg, we have to like brand our city. Lighthouse projects, all these keywords that you know maybe from discourse here. And all this has an effect on the city and how it's structured. For instance, you have in Hamburg now, in St. Pauli, close to the river, the maritime event zone. Behind it is like the Schanzenviertel, which is like the latte zone, and near to the train stations there's the gay upmarket latte zone. You have in the city center something they call business improvement district, where actually the public space is given to the shop owners. Of course, you have the creative knitwear, felt hat and wine areas, which are like older gentrification areas. You have the classical, like rich people's areas, like the Golden Retriever jogging shore or the Tommy Hilfiger redemption zone. And you have a high security sector where all the embassies are. And you have this like upmarket green living step jacket areas. I don't know if you have them here. And of course you have working class area with the potential to be gentrified, and you have areas where the people are pushed, which is always the outskirt of the city. And nevertheless, the rents even rise here. So people who are displaced from here go here. And in Hamburg, you have a special case. On the other side of the Elbe, you have the Hafen city, and you have an area called Wilhelmsburg, which is now inhabited by many people of Turkish origin, and the city wants to push them out by art. So they introduced the International Garden Exhibition and the International Building Exhibition, and do a lot of symbolic things that project this idea of, hey, middle classes, you can go here. You know, that's the bottom line. Only you can walk here. What kind of art is done is completely irrelevant, because you know, when you do a critical project there, it gets swallowed between like the Hafen City Marathon, or, you know, this type of stuff, or the longest table for soup eating or contest, or stuff like that. So the situation was depressing. I have to skip this, although it's an extremely funny story how the Bambule stopped the Olympic Games, which was a little group of punks. Hamburg wanted to apply for the Olympics, but London won. And when they found out, then they thought, we can't make ourselves dependent on this Olympic committee, we would have to do something ourselves. And the Senator for Economy gave the Senate a book to read. It's called Richard Florida's Rise of the Creative Class. So everyone in Hamburg politics had to read it. Florida is being invited to town, and a guy called Roland Berger develops the concept Talent City Hamburg. Talent doesn't mean artists, because they still left the city in the direction of Berlin. It could have gone on like that forever, when suddenly the Right to the City movement came up, and one of the first groups that was founded was called It's Raining Caviar. For instance, It's Raining Caviar developed the devaluation kit, which how do you ruin the image of your house to ruin the image of your neighborhood by like banging satellite dishes to your door, to your window, attaching these clothes racks, start the broken windows effect with a broken windows effect foil, do fake repairs to achieve this ghetto-rigged look, attach foreign names to your doorbell, hide your Gucci bag in a Lidl bag. It wasn't too successful, but it set the tone for the movement. And at the same time, several things. I mean, Hamburg was kind of not moving too much for a while, and in a situation of shock somehow. And several things happened independently from each other. Some people founded the Centro Sociale as a counterpoint to gentrification. For me, a very interesting moment was when Pelin Tan came to our self-organized little discussion club and explained the situation in Istanbul as is written down here in Germany, how they employ the slogan, the right to the city, to kind of connect different cultural groups and especially different rights that people have in areas. And I found that was for me the first moment when I understand the term right to the city. Here you have a group of artists who kind of didn't understand it yet. They had an intermediate youth project in an old bowling place. And they were kind of like, maybe if we tell the city how useful they are, they will give us a new place when they kick us out here. The investors who had bought their house told them afterwards, if you had resisted for only 4 weeks, we would have to pay like millions, and you could have blocked the building process for years. So it's not always good to be too opportunistic. I skip this one and go straight to my street, where a group of investors had bought a row of houses here. I live here. Here's Park Fiction. Here's like the former squat Hafenstraße. So this area was pretty safe from gentrification for 10 years. But then the brewery here, Astra Brewery, was sold and a giant complex came up. And you here have the classical gent gap situation, rent gap situation, gent gap, that's a good one. The gent gap. Okay, rent gap situation. Here, 300 million euros were dug, and here, like, relatively low rent was paid. So, of course, every investor thinks like, oh, I buy this cheap, and I have a guaranteed return of 10-20% or more revenue. So, investors bought this part here, and in the neighborhood, we organized. We got a tip-off from a politician that there had been an agreement to kick out everybody who was living there, so we arranged in a local bar this meeting, and everybody came and wanted to stop the thing. Margit developed a logo, like on the second night. It was called No B&Q, and it was yellow and pink, and we wanted to have a logo that doesn't look like leftist politics in the first place, and in the second place that is a bit not so easy to understand. So people were split about if we should use it or not, but the effect that it had was interesting. Everybody put the little thing up, like really everybody, so the whole street was full with these tiny flags. And of course, people came there and wondered, why is there these flags? So it was like, so everybody who had like one of these flags on their cars and wherever was forced to explain what was happening. So everybody got active part of this resistance thing. So it's not always good to have a very clear sign that about your politics, but to work more artistically and more with alchemy, so to say. And it creates a very different situation. Yeah, this is the rock and wrestling crew who started a anti-gentrification wrestling show where they beat up these houses. Another thing that happened was that a film got ready who was explaining the gentrification process in St. Pauli, because we tend to forget if it goes like the mild way that we have in Hamburg. Maybe I think here it's like so clear what happens, but in Hamburg it's not so clear. After 2 years, you forget who you don't see on the street anymore. Ah, we are through. 1 more minute, okay. Okay. I have to come to my conclusion, otherwise I'll get nailed for, yeah, what's your original thought? I think the central thing is, I need 2 more minutes. I'm sorry. Okay, so we made a congress in 2009 called the Right to the City Congress, only a little congress in Hamburg internally. And there I presented this drawing, and the idea was, how do you connect tenants' fights, the social question, the politics of desire, everyday practices of appropriation like skateboarding or like raving, self-organized spaces. How could you connect these to surround this image city things and attack it at some point? And I think that the key thing is that now that the cities are so important and urban space and the fight to be in the center is the central thing, that suddenly you can connect fights that had nothing to do with each other in the past. That means tenants' fights or artists who want to have a space or young people who just need a place to hang out. The spatial question connects these in a way that it was not possible to think like 10 years ago, or 15 or 20. Now that's the theory, and there was one thing I want to talk about because it was so successful. This is a group of like artists who made every compromise and had done all these intermediate projects, and they were meeting secretly, but they were kind of sick of being kicked out of buildings after a year. And they made the secret meeting in a cellar in the city center for half a year. Everybody could come. It wasn't announced everywhere and anywhere, but they would put the batteries out of their mobile phones. But besides that, it was a very open structure, and they planned to squat 15 houses in the city center of Hamburg with images. And if someone had said, yeah, you can protect a house with a painting, you would have thought you can't, but the 200 artists in the end made exhibition in these 15 houses and managed to get them and to force the city to buy it back from an investor. More things happened and more, the Gentropoly, parallel planning, the Waltz Parade. Oh my God, I have to leave out so much. It's a pity. A faked Hamburg image magazine called Hamburg Under Vultures came out. All the initiatives came together, and the city was forced to introduce some laws that do a little protection to the city. However, I wanted to end with this. The dangerous split is between separating art from the social. This happens from 2 directions. On the one hand, you have the creative class discourse, which tries to take the creative part but leave out the social question. So you have art as the privileged exception. And you have a leftist or neo-Puritan discourse, which likes to kind of argument along lines of guilt and self-definition as victim, who would like to cut off the social and is somehow locked in a position between omnipotence and powerlessness. And it sometimes meets with anti-art resentments. So that's one of the things. And I think in contrast to that strategy, one should follow a spatialize your desires strategy, connect struggles, and get things moving. That is like the positive ending. The story goes on, but I stop at this point.